Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Afghan Eye podcast. I'm your host Sangar Paykhar, and in today's episode, we continue our discussion regarding Afghanistan's role in connecting Central and South Asia. Our esteemed guest is Dr. Shanthie D'Souza. Dr. D'Souza is the founder and president of the Mantraya Institute for Strategic Studies in Goa and a senior research fellow at the University of Massachusetts Amherst School of Public Policy. She also serves as a visiting faculty at India's Naval War College in Goa, with more than 20 years of field based research and policy work across Afghanistan, Pakistan, and South Asia's fragile societies. Her expertise spans counterterrorism, post conflict reconstruction, and climate and energy diplomacy. We're honored to have her as our guest today. Dr. D'Souza, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you as our guest on the Afghan Eye podcast. We've briefly met each other in Termez. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on board. And it's always a pleasure and privilege to speak on Afghanistan, particularly at a time when the world seems to have forgotten Afghanistan. So, congratulations and keep up the terrific work with your podcast and the focus on Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. Dr. D'Souza, before we dive in, maybe you can briefly tell us about the Termez Dialogue, where we briefly met each other in Uzbekistan. What was your general impression of the conference over there?
Well, I was glad to be a participant and contributing to the Termez Dialogue. It was good to meet you there and not many friends, made new friends. But I think the most important part of the inaugural Termez Dialogue was the fact that it focused on regional connectivity and cooperation. What amazes me is the fact that Central Asian countries have got their act together, and Uzbekistan, having taken the lead, has been able to bring all of them together on a table to discuss cooperation very seriously. And therein lies the fact that South Asia, which remains quite divided and scattered at the moment, has not been able to get its act together. Here, I think the importance of Afghanistan is so crucial to understand how regional connectivity works and why Afghanistan, which is a land bridge connecting South Asia with Central Asia, requires that attention and help to reconnect the region, which will obviously help Afghanistan, but more importantly, connect this region. So I think Termez Dialogue was innovative, much needed, and timely in a way of bringing together South and Central Asia. It also brought in other regional powers on the platform, which again is very essential. But I think to take that forward, we need to look at how we work around Afghanistan, especially given the fact that Afghanistan is going through its own transition and is looking at stabilizing and becoming a responsible actor on the world stage.
Thank you. And from your perspective, how does Afghanistan figure into India's strategic vision for Central and South Asia?
Afghanistan has always remained very important for India for primarily three reasons. One is there is a huge historical and civilizational connect, which has spanned centuries, and you've seen the kind of cultural and societal linkages which exist between the people of Afghanistan and India is very much intact. So from the romantic versions of Kabuliwala to what you see among Afghans today in terms of understanding India is very different. But I think that's a function of the fact that there's a lot of traffic and a lot of connectivity, that is people-to-people connectivity, which has been built. So I think historically and civilizationally and on social basis, Afghanistan remains important to India. On the security count, it also remains important to India because it's an arena of great power competition and regional power rivalry. So certain countries have used Afghanistan against India, and thereby there is a little bit of distrust of what Afghanistan means in terms of stabilizing the region and, more importantly, India's security catalyst. But last but not the least is also the economic factor. Afghanistan, as I mentioned before, is a land bridge, and India intends to build on that land bridge so that there is greater connectivity with Central Asia. So I think Afghanistan has been very important in many ways, but fundamentally it's on the economics and also on the people-to-people connect.
Based on that role that Afghanistan plays, if we look at how other regional actors have engaged with the current government in Afghanistan, for example, China, Russia, Central Asian republics, they have developed a very formal and more or less official diplomatic relations. Russia even went as far as officially recognizing the current government in Afghanistan. How does India look at the current government, and what is the outlook for the next 6 months or a year? Is there any possibility that India moves towards official recognition? If not, what are the arguments in favor or against any such move?
Well, yeah, I think India, as I mentioned, has a long-standing relationship with Afghanistan. So when Taliban captured power on August 15, 2021, India was left with no much option but to engage with, unlike the rest of the international community, particularly the recent past. So you do see the variations when it comes to, between engagement and recognition. And there are countries like China who's gone ahead engaging to an extent of even accepting the ambassador from the Taliban in Beijing. And now you have Russia, which has formally granted recognition based on its own security considerations, but the fact that they think it's time to negotiate and recognize the Taliban on their own terms. Now, what and where does that leave India with? So we see most of the countries are inching from engagement to recognition. India has maintained a position of engaging with the Taliban for the moment. It's a huge step to provide recognition because the world, particularly the international community and the UN, has not done so. So thereby, I think it will take time for that to occur. But beyond that whole debate, beyond between recognition and engagement, is a thin fine line of how do you deal with the current reality in Afghanistan, a regime which is occupying power and is going to be there for some time. Nothing dramatic is going to change, but still India needs to engage. So India has adopted the policy of engagement. And that engagement just doesn't go in terms of, just the political engagement. It also is more about people to people engagement, increasing humanitarian assistance, working on the small development projects, and helping the Taliban and Afghanistan the way it's needed at this point of time. Now, just to give a brief understanding of what India's policy has been right from time of independence from 1947 till now, look at where did Afghanistan figure in India's imagination and why Afghanistan is very important to India. It might look like a distant country. Most of the policymakers in India would not give it a primary focus, but there is an understanding. There is a sense that Afghanistan is critical for India's stability, particularly when India is looking at connecting with the Central Asian region. So, right from independence, India has always supported Afghanistan, and likewise, Afghanistan has stood by India. So, that bond remains. So, despite the change in government or a regime, doesn't mean that the relationship will be ruptured. And then again, it comes fundamentally to this question, which is the agreement of strategic partnership, which says we'll deal with any power or government of the day, and that's what India is doing. So, when you look at engagement, you have to take it in with the understanding that this means dealing and working. And in that, there is a hope that there will be normalizing of the relationship. There will be a mainstreaming of the Taliban. There's certain extreme ideas or worldviews which are not in sync with what India thinks should be the reality will gradually change because then there is a give and take. So at the moment, it is testing each other's avenues, looking at how to deal and understand with the priorities of the people and the country, and not letting Afghanistan just slip by because India had that clout and influence for the last 2 decades. It invested tremendously in Afghanistan. It has pledged more than $3 billion US. It's the largest regional donor, has supported Afghanistan, and has tremendous goodwill inside Afghanistan. To lose that clout, to lose that leverage would be detrimental. So India is engaging with the Taliban at the moment. And as countries start moving towards recognition, maybe there will be a change. But that labeling between engagement and recognition, I would say, is a fine line, which I think we need to perceive from the policymakers' perspective, that the reality is we deal, but we don't give everything what is asked, because then you need certain leverage, which is essential for any country to have certain kind of influence and outcome in the country they're engaging or investing in.
Thank you. One other issue that may be relevant here is if we look at the current situation in India, we have a Hindu nationalist sort of party ruling the country. There are reports of tensions between the Hindu majority and Muslims. And at the same time, we have a government in Afghanistan that is very staunchly, I don't even like to use that term, but Islamist. And these, tensions in India and the current government in Afghanistan, would that be any concern for India, like engaging with a government that is very staunchly Islamist, while the current leading party in India has more or less a reputation of not being so, how do you say, in favor of their own Muslim minority? I also see a lot of reports in Indian media where basically they always report how Hindu and Sikh minorities are persecuted in Afghanistan. I'm sure that also plays a role in how India perceives Afghanistan, and any diplomatic move towards recognition or any engagement will also have its implications. So, how would you describe that situation? Like, does the religious identity of Afghanistan's current government and the religious and nationalist issues in India play a role in how India engages with Afghanistan?
Well, I think what you're reading in the reports and what's happening on the ground, there might be a disconnect. There is an understanding between communities and between the religious minorities. And as you see, India today, it's growing at its own pace. It's making certain progress in certain areas. But that doesn't really impact in terms of foreign policy. For instance, if you look at the Realpolitik, which is a realist perspective, which is driving the foreign policy of India today, it's about rising on the global stage. It's looking at its economic rationale of becoming a big power. So it wouldn't be tied down to religious or ethnic or any kind of communal sentiments at this point of time. Because the fact of the matter is that there is a total bit of geopolitical flux. And in that flux, India has to position itself. Now, if you look world over, there is a rise of nationalist and populist movements, and most of them are occupying countries. You also see right wing parties in Europe and elsewhere gaining prominence. So there is a certain level of idea of tolerance towards the minorities, which is questioned at point of time. But I think the beauty and the fact is the idea of India is still intact. The constitution still protects and gives the rights. So, and that does not really translate into foreign policy because, as I mentioned, it's a real politics. Now you have Taliban, who has an extreme view of Islam, as you mentioned, but Taliban are also realist in their own view. See the way they're engaging. I'm not sure how it works out when it comes to these ideas between the hardliners and the softliner, or the one between Kabul Shura and the Kandahar Shura works out. But the fundamental factors are when policymakers in Delhi are dealing with their counterparts in Afghanistan, they seem to be more realist. They seem to be more economic in their point of view. So that itself will show that it is a real politic and it's a realist view, which are trying this governments together, the regime with the Indian government in lot many ways. So I don't think it's a religious point of view which plays out in such a way. And I don't think at times the media tends to magnify a lot of issues that it has reached such a point or a tipping point where there could be a spillover of the religious sentiment, where there is an anti-Muslim or anti-Hindu sentiment which plays out in foreign policy. So I think there's checks and balances which has kept the foreign policy focused on achieving the key objectives the country needs at this point of time. And what are those? One is on the international stage to show India as a responsible power, rising power. Second is on the regional level, when region is looking up to it to play and match up to that role. And third is the fundamental reality is that you have to deal with your neighbors. You can't change that reality. It's a geographical reality, and I think India realizes that. So there might be different regimes, there might be different views, but when it comes to real politics or one's own national interest, I think there's a convergence which naturally forms.
Thank you. I think that one of the matters that I often observe here, especially in Europe, is that from a European perspective, understanding Afghanistan is also through a liberal perspective on international relations. And It's more ideological and less realist, at least in the way diplomats, media, and key actors talk about Afghanistan. While in the region, as you mentioned, India has a realist perspective on the matter. Would you say that in South Asia and in Central Asia, the driving factor between regional connectivity is first and foremost a realist perspective, or are other aspects that need to be also explored? Why suddenly we see this shift towards regional connectivity now?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, Europe has a different way of looking at things, especially given the fact that they're quite distant and do not understand the cultural and the social, economic status of the region. So I think the view they taken is just not liberal; it's also normative at point of time. So when you use a normative lens and are judgmental about a certain regime or a government, then your realist aspirations or realist point of view gets watered down. For India, that option really doesn't exist because it has to work with the neighbors in the region. Now, the regional connectivity projects have been in the pipeline for quite some time. Now, look at Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. It's been a pipe dream from the 1990s, and we hear that there's been progress being made, and that it would tie these countries which are in conflict in a very mutually beneficial cooperative framework, and thereby would minimize conflict. But as of now, we know that there is certain progress being made. Turkmenistan states that it has completed its part of the pipeline project. Afghanistan, under the Taliban, is very much interested in being party to it, and that leaves the other two countries in conflict, Pakistan and India, to get together. So I think regional connectivity and economic cooperation has been a driving force. It is a fundamental driver, and unfortunately, it's not got that importance or the necessary inputs to make those kind of cooperative frameworks work. So most of the time we talk about, even when you talk about 1,000, it works, but how about extending it to India or having more trade with India? Now, what does Afghanistan need? Afghanistan has been a rentier state. It has been an aid dependent state because fundamentally the conflict of the last 4 decades has destroyed its economy. But by itself, Afghanistan had its own economy. Our Helmand was a breadbasket. It has mineral reserves. It has the energy and electric potential. It is capable of sustaining and even helping the region. But then that didn't occur. So now, when you look at economic connectivity, you could normalize, you could stabilize Afghanistan by these economic projects. Then why isn't there no initiative seriously? And therein, I think dialogues like Termez Dialogue are important. I think we need more such dialogue in the region to bring that understanding that, the business groups, the chambers of commerce, the youth, uh, the women leaders, all of these should be a part of those policy making circles where there is a certain enabling force or a driving force which keeps these groups which are interested connected just beyond those infrastructure projects. So when you look at TAPI and you look at those other projects, you're looking at the infrastructure. But it is the soft infrastructure which matters. It is the capabilities in the region. It is about building that capacity and also having that kind of interest generated because there's a profit motive. Either you're getting employment opportunities or you're getting some construction work or there's certain kind of engagement at an economic level, which brings in the people. So if you have a policy when you're talking about papers in those maps and those projects drawn out by World Bank or the ADB, and then when it comes to the issue of implementation, then you are facing a roadblock. So I think we need to have a more deeper understanding of the region, just not in terms of conflict, but also about people. What are the interests? What is the stakeholdership? Who are the stakeholders? How do we have a multi-level stakeholder engagement in the region where there is a certain buy-in between the stakeholders that even if there are conflict between countries, people and the business can keep them together. Now look at the Afghanistan-Pakistan trade and transit agreement. I mean, it is one of the problem areas, and I think both the countries need to do better. Why isn't trade being permitted by Pakistan from Afghanistan to India? So you have goods or trucks coming through goods from Afghanistan to India to Wagah border, but then they can't go with goods from India. So How do you have greater economic projects? How do you generate that kind of economic potential for Afghanistan to generate its own revenue and to be independent and not to be dependent on others and for the money from outside? So I think we need to understand that Afghanistan fundamentally needs assistance more in terms of economic stabilization. Raja region needs regional economic projects because the conflict itself has not paid off. Pakistan is facing the consequences of the conflict. It's facing a strategic blowback for the policies it initiated in terms of finding strategic depth in Afghanistan vis-a-vis India, the zero-sum game which played out. And at the end, we look at a region which still has the tremendous potential, but it's not able to get its act together.
How would you describe the role of Afghanistan in this current situation? Because right now there are tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there are tensions between India and Pakistan. Yet both India and Pakistan have their interests and they have their agenda in how to deal with the current government in Afghanistan. What role can Afghanistan play in this area? Do you see any constructive and positive role, or do you think that Afghanistan has absolutely no impact on the relationship between India and Pakistan?
Well, I think all three countries have problems of their own sort. I think fundamentally one is the border issue, the differences on the dual line between Afghanistan and Pakistan, the fact that Pakistan asserts that the Taliban are providing sanctuary to the Taliban Pakistan, that there are water issues, then there are refugee issues. And then more importantly, the trade issues. I think it's an economic denial for a huge potential Afghanistan has at this point of time. So that in that scenario, how do you think Afghanistan can play an important part? I think it's about regional connectivity and investing more in the economics of Afghanistan. I think there is tremendous potential. Now, again, if you look at what Termez Dialogue pointed out or highlighted was the fact that there is a free trade area. You have Afghans coming there and selling their ware and making some business and going back. So I think this is the innovative project. So how about having that on the borders, giving that free trade access to Afghans and then letting them move and come to India? So why does India still have to depend on the air freight corridors which are not cost effective? So I think we need to understand that it's the need of the region, it's the need of the people that if you open up in terms of free trade areas, give them more access for business and trade, that itself will minimize a lot of conflict and will take away the distrust between the people. So at this moment, Afghanistan and Pakistan are having the difference. When Taliban marched in on 15th August 2021, Pakistan saw it as a victory, but gradually it was not a victory. Because any regime or any government of the day will fundamentally look at its own national interests, and that's what the Taliban are doing. And that's not surprising at all. So it's not that it's slanting towards India or it's tilting towards other countries. That's why it's taking its position. No, the Taliban are being realistic and looking at it from an Afghan point of view. And that, I think, is fundamental reality of the day that whoever is in power in the national interest. And thereby there might come a time when you're at loggerheads with the sponsors or the ones who actually supported you. So Pakistan will have to walk a long way to understand that Afghanistan needs help in its economic stabilization first. So if they have to open up the trade more for the Afghans, not denying them the route to and access to the sea, which landlocked Afghanistan has always suffered in the hands of Pakistan. So I think gradually they have to work on confidence building mechanisms, which are fundamentally economic in nature. And then the gradual distrust will be, in a way addressed at the political and the security level. So if there is a people-to-people connect built up between the chambers of the sports, and there is more initiative and more aid given to Afghanistan to stabilize, then Pakistan will not have problems of refugees or all the sanctuaries they're talking about. So I think they need to have a long view of what stability in Afghanistan means for Pakistan's security. And likewise with India. I mean, India has invested considerably in Afghanistan. A stable Afghanistan, a prosperous Afghanistan is in India's interest. That links you to this whole policy India has with Central Asia, which is connect Central Asia. And at the moment, because of the difficulties with Pakistan, it is disconnected in not many ways. So where does India have an option in terms of, engaging more in the region? It has to look at alternative routes. So it looks at Iran very seriously and then You have the Chabahar Port project, which is very essential for India. Just not to access Central Asia, but also to the international north-south transport corridor, which is a huge project for India. So all these projects have been, or potential of Afghanistan remains underutilized and underexplored because these countries have so much of distrust among themselves. So how do we get them together? And my sense is that work on the economics, work with the people, build that connect, and gradually over time, things will change. It will be an incremental, a generation project, but things will change for the better.
Thank you. I think on that matter, we're both on the same page. And after Termez Dialogue, I traveled to Kabul. I spent a few weeks there. I met a lot of people. I spoke with a lot of people who are also involved in dialogues, regional connectivity, trade, commerce, investment, etc. And one of the topics that I saw repeatedly being discussed is how can we deal with the tensions in South Asia, and how can we contribute to any kind of mutual understanding between the two states so that we can finally, build on our, trade and economic development plans in the region. And something that came up during those conversations is, why can't we have a conference in Kabul with South Asian actors, maybe actors from stakeholders from Central Asia as well, and Iran? Doesn't have to be a formal conference with diplomatic missions from all these countries, but people who are more or less track to diplomacy category, scholars, commentators, journalists, and maybe representatives of business community. Maybe we can organize that. Have a conference in Kabul, invite everyone, spend some time together, just like we did in Termez, have face-to-face conversations and see how we can help each other. Maybe something that needs to be done is shaping people's perception and opinions about the region, because what I do experience when I talk with my Pakistani friends, also Pakistanis who are outside Pakistan, and some of them who are in Pakistan, there is this level of understanding that these tensions and problems cannot last forever. At some point in our region, we have to develop this ability to look beyond what has happened in the last 80 years or more and see what benefits all of us. But in order to facilitate a dialogue like that, we need to see if there is actually goodwill and incentive in the region. From my understanding, like in Kabul, I have met a lot of people who are very, very receptive to this idea. And based on my experience in Tashkent and in Termez with the friends that we've made there and the people we've talked to, I also think that they would also be interested in an initiative like that. Do you think that there is potential for organizing something of that nature in Kabul? And would you and maybe your colleagues as well, other people who are very involved in the regional matters, would they be interested in participating in a conference like that?
I think it's an excellent idea, and I've always been a propounder of the fact that all these conferences should be inside Afghanistan, in Kabul, Kandahar, Jalalabad, all those places which are the key nodal points of the region. And I think it's time to do that. The fact that I've not been able to go back and I'm waiting to get back there is just to understand how things are on the ground. And for that, I think we need to have conferences inside Afghanistan, in Kabul particularly, to build that connect. And I think there's a lot of disconnect at the moment. You don't understand what's happening inside Afghanistan. You can't reach out to people in Afghanistan because you are disconnected, because you don't have that kind of platform. So I think a conference is an excellent idea, a much needed idea, and it would be very timely to do that now, given the fact that Taliban are just crossing their 4-year mark this August. And if they have to show something on governance, which is a reality which the Taliban have to work around, because there's lots to do on the governance front to improve accountability, to improve revenue, to provide opportunities to the people, connect people to the larger region and the businesses in the region, build transport corridors, have more access for the farmers in terms of selling their produce, provide them that access which is much required. So I think it's time to do all this. Now, my only small glitch or whatever I would talk about in terms of conferencing is that it should just not remain in the idea of conferences. I mean, we do a lot of conferences. I'm sure you know about those projects which were in Afghanistan last 2 decades. Then you had Art of Asia conferences. So it ends up as a lip service. It doesn't really translate into action, and that's when you have an ideational space where a certain idea is discussed in terms of how do we connect South Asia with Central Asia? How does Afghanistan benefit by being the bridge between these two regions? I think we need to also have people who are from a practitioner point of view. And when I'm talking about practitioner, I'm just not talking about government officials because government officials are more bureaucratic. I mean, they have the certain ideas, they do certain tasks. It's the people on the ground who know the reality, who know how to work around that reality and make that dream possibility. So I think we need more of working groups. So we can have one conference and then start in that working groups. You can have people from academia, you can have people from the business houses, you have someone with technical expertise. Now, if you're looking at improving agricultural productivity in Afghanistan, how do you substitute coffee with saffron cultivation so that the farmers can derive benefit of it? Is it a feasible idea? So we need to do a lot of groundwork in understanding the feasibility, the possibility of mapping out the stakeholdership, and then seeing how do we implement those ideas. Ultimately, whatever grand ideas exist in terms of either academic papers or the conferences need to be translated on the ground. It has to benefit the people, and that's when I think a conference is essential. But we also need follow-up conferences and a regular point of meeting to see how those ideas are working, or whether we need to get in some, make a segue and get better people on the ground to make those additional sphere or the space a practical one.
You touched on something very important here, is that I'm also a big critic and opponent of performative stuff that has been going on for decades. And from my perspective, I think the more critical voices, people who have been critical of these endless cycles of conferences and standard talking points, we need to identify those people and then approach them and see if they are interested in participating in a conference like that. Because there are always circles of people who think that having conferences and having dialogue is just, keeping this process alive. But the approach towards something more tangible, something more practical, requires a different mindset. And you also need a little bit like a different type of people who, as you described, who are more on the side of practitioners. But those people need to be identified. Like, for example, in Kabul, if I'm there, I know a handful of people who have been involved in facilitating a lot of commerce, trade, employment opportunities, not just in Afghanistan, but also with neighboring countries. Those are the people that I think they can be very productive in any kind of dialogue. But we need to identify those actors also in the region. Merely having academics is, I don't also think that that's not sufficient, because there are all kinds of academics. So in my view, I think since I am not very familiar with India and I don't know much about India, I think it's something that needs to be done. We need to first identify those people and see who they are and how they can contribute, and then, because the intentions for organizing something like that are real. Like, there are a lot of people who have actually proposed this idea. So I really hope that this materializes into something tangible in the near future. But my personal concern would be, how do we select and identify the right people so that we have, as you described, work groups where we work towards specific goals. One issue that I think is very relevant here is that we have a government in Afghanistan where the administrators are Taliban. Some of them are people who have been fighting for the last 30 years. Others are not really people with a military background. They are more leaders of madrasas and stuff like that. But proper, like, administrators, people who have worked for decades in governance, they are not in the leadership positions right now in Afghanistan. What I do notice is that if someone has a really practical proposal for any policy, anything that can be implemented, they're very open to ideas. So suppose we have any kind of mechanism that we can get all the stakeholders from the region together, come with ideas, develop a mechanism that can be implemented. I'm sure that in Afghanistan they will accept those proposals because, as you described, the foreign policy of Afghanistan is realist. Their approach towards the region is based on realism. Our internal politics are not very realistic. It's more ideological in many ways. But even in that sense, if something benefits the economy and that if something provides employment for people, if something contributes to stability, they will not reject that. So that's why I think we have a fertile ground for practical ideas that can be planted there, and we can actually see something evolve from these engagements and dialogues. And this is why I think what is our responsibility as the non-official representatives of these countries is to identify the right people and see how we can work towards something pragmatic and practical. Do you have that kind of contacts with people in Pakistan?
Interesting, because I think identifying right people is very important. Who you get inside the room, who you get to the table, and what is the agenda to be discussed. So if you don't have a fundamental ideas clear, what do you want to achieve from a conference, then you can just end up as a talking shop, talking endlessly about it, but not being able to implement it. So if there are people in Kabul who have the experience, who have the knowledge, who have the capacity and the interest to do that, I think we need to first get them into a room, chalk out a program of what you want to achieve. Say, look at, from short term to medium term and then medium to long term. Short to medium term, I think definitely you need small and medium enterprises. You need more on agriculture. You need to do more on terms of livelihood projects so that people are able to generate income. And also, I think climate is another area which needs serious attention. Afghanistan is paying the price for the climate change carried out by countries. It's become a victim of climate crisis. So I think that is affecting in terms of drought, in terms of floods, in terms of agricultural productivity and the life of the people. So I think we need to get those, priority areas of looking at which are the areas you need urgent attention. How do you build that kind of stakeholdership? Do you get from the region? What kind of expertise is needed? Because there's been a tremendous flight of capital from Afghanistan. Afghanistan needs definitely more regional experts who understand the country better and are able to connect on a social and economic platform because of the similarity of the terrain and common lifestyle at certain level. So I think we need to look at that kind of engagement where you start inside Afghanistan, start very, locally, start with communities, then scale it up. I'm not a great proponent of a top-down approach because I don't think it's the best thing to do in any country to impose a view on communities who are very far off from what you are thinking. And that might not be their need. So I think to first understand what is the need of the communities, how do you actually scale it up to the district level, then to the provincial level, and then to the national level. And this comes from my experience of working with IDLG, that is the Independent Department of Local Governance, and always thought that bottom-up approach works much better than a top-down. And Afghanistan, the way it is, the way the polity and the society is organized, I think that will work fundamentally well. So even beyond Kabul, you can look at people in communities, in the districts, who have ideas which are brilliant and need help. And even in the last 2 decades, those people had brilliant ideas, but there were no takers because everyone from the international community thought they had the best ideas. And I always say that, for the international community, Afghanistan was a laboratory to try the experiment. And when the experiment failed, they walked away, leaving the Afghans with nothing. So I don't want to see a repeat of that in Afghanistan. I think the time has come back now to get back to the basics, get back to the blackboard, get back to those communities who need your help. They are the ones who are living in that region for centuries together. They know what they should be done in that part of the world or in their part of the community. So I think give it to them. So take a community-led initiative, scale it up, and then look at the region and then outside, and then get the support you need. Because otherwise, what happens is that funding dictates agenda, or the ones who write a or concept note dictates the agenda, which might not be the need for Afghans. So get the Afghans together, and I think this is one opportunity Afghanistan has things back in.
Thank you for saying that. I think, that's a very good point. Even in my own province, Kabul, where I'm from, like I notice exactly what you just described is that, for example, in our district, they built a gigantic power generator that generates power from diesel in Kabul. And diesel had to be imported through Pakistan into Afghanistan so that they can generate electricity for Kabul city. And it was a ridiculous idea, but the people in the region, they were never asked for their input. They were never asked for their opinion. My uncle, who is actually an engineer specialized in power and electricity, he's from that area and that district, and he was working in that sector. And he said that when these ideas were implemented and everything, there was never any incentive to ask us, local experts, local people. The money came from outside, they made a project, they executed, and then they left. And now we have this empty place. It's of no use to anyone. But those are the people that should have been involved. Those are the people, like whether it's agriculture, renewable energy, anything. We need to involve local actors, and I completely agree with you say. And I hope that we can actually do that this time around in Afghanistan, because decades have gone by and we're still stuck in the same situation. Dr. D'Souza, I would like to thank you for your time, for your input. It was a very valuable conversation. I really look forward to meeting you again, and hopefully we can continue this conversation. If our listeners and viewers would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
I think it would be my email ID. So you can share my email ID. And as you said, I think I would just like to conclude by saying that put Afghans first. Local stakeholdership is very important. Local ownership is also very important. So anything we start, I mean, I don't want to get into the way international aid was given in the last 2 decades. I don't think it helped the Afghans much the way it should have, because if you look at most of the projects, they ended up as ghost projects, and you were mentioning one. So I think we need to take care of those instances, and if there are any lessons learned, I think we need to learn those lessons on economic terms, because that fundamentally affects people's lives and affects security. I think, to see security without understanding how economics influences and matters is, I think, a very limited understanding of security. So I think we need to have a comprehensive view of Afghanistan, put Afghans at the center and at the helm of the table. Because all that 2 decades you heard, Afghan-led, Afghan, all of that. But then it really, when things fell apart, there was nothing to do with the Afghans. Afghans left the country. Those who left took the money and took the resources, and those are inside the country are struggling today. So I think it's a fundamental responsibility for the international community and all of us who work in Afghanistan to see that Afghans get the right place in the national community, have their basics needs met, have the right to live, to have the employment opportunities, to live the way they want to live without telling us how they should. So I think we need to put Afghans at the centerpiece of any development project, any conference, any idea which is going to transform the region. And I think Afghans are completely capable of doing things on their own. They don't need capacity building. They're one of the smartest people I know. Even 15 days of training, they can do the work which even 3 years of training in the rest of the region doesn't really translate. I've seen that capacity and that talent inside them, the desire to do things. So I think we need to keep that flame alive and help Afghans find their own way. And for that, if there's any way I can help, I'll be most happy to do so. And I can be reached by my email ID. Thank you for the opportunity to talk on Afghanistan and for Afghanistan and for the Afghans. I would say Tashakor and their Manat.